So welcome back to our third session of Herbs for Health here at the Concrete Gardens. Today we're going to look at some plants that actually grow quite commonly in this garden and in a lot of herb gardens as well, and things that people think of as culinary herbs that we can also use whilst competing with the seagulls, that we can also use to make things for health, a lot of them external treatments. So today we're going to look at catmint, or catnip as some people know it. This is what it looks like fresh, and I've brought some dried stuff along as well here. This is the catnip that a lot of cats go a bit crazy for. We're also going to be looking at hyssop. Now hyssop, see, this is a perfect time to pick it because it's just coming out in little flowers on some of the stalks. And with most flowering plants, if you're using the leaves rather than the flowers, you want to pick them just around the time that they're starting to flower. Some of these stronger flavoured ones like hyssop, it doesn't make a big difference if you pick them later on, but it is really good to pick them when they're just starting to flower for all the potency to be in the leaves. We're also looking at marigold, which you've got here in the garden, lots and lots of this, or calendula, some people know it, and I'm going to use that dried. I've got some dried stuff I've brought along with that as well. And then finally, we're going to look at oregano, and look at this from more culinary perspective, which you've also got in the garden. So let's go and have a little look at some of those. Okay, so this is some of the plants that we're going to be using today. The first one here is hyssop. As you can see, these little purple flowers are just starting to come out. Now hyssop is a kind of quite underused herb. The very exciting Latin name is Hyssopus officinalis, which is not too difficult to remember. We're going to make it into a syrup, and it's particularly good for children for respiratory conditions, so coughs and colds. So what you would do is take a little bit of syrup and dilute that down, probably with some warm or hot water, so that it soothes the throat as it goes down. So that's hyssop, and you can also use it in cooking as well. We're also going to be looking at oregano, which we have here, which is in flower. So officially it's sort of past its best for use, but actually the flowers are really tasty and the leaves have still got like quite a lot of volatile oils in them. So oregano, we're going to be looking at more from a culinary perspective. We're going to be using that in an oil, and that makes a really lovely salad dressing. One of the third ones that we have is catmint, which is hiding in here. So this is not catmint, but this little bit here, which you can see these are actually quite furry to touch, and they sort of look slightly furry as well. And this is also really good for children's respiratory conditions. And what we're going to look at is using that dried in a little pouch. It's particularly good for children if they're getting really like snotty basically at night, and they're having trouble and they're waking up a lot with that. If you put some dried catmint kind of between the pillowcase and the pillow, and then they can just breathe that in throughout the night, and that can help to clear that kind of gunky catarrh. And our fourth plant is marigold, or calendula officinalis, and we're going to be using this dried in oil. We don't put fresh marigold into oil because it will rot, because these are really succulent. These, what look like petals, are actually all individual little flowers, but these are really, really succulent, and there's way too much moisture in them, so we'll talk about that a wee bit more when we get to the oil. But marigold oil is really good for skin. It's particularly good for like baby skin, so we're doing quite a lot of children's stuff this week, and also for mums if they're nursing, if they're getting kind of problems with their nipples. That is a really good one for that as well. It's also lovely dried in a mix in a herbal tea, and it's said to cheer people up because it's like bringing a little ray of sunshine in, because these are like little suns. And it's also very, very prolific. You can see, so each of these individual petals that, or what look like petals but actually flowers, they all each form an individual seed, and there's something like 50 to 100 seeds in every single one, so it spreads a lot, and it's a really really lovely garden plant, and we're going to make some oil with that. So we're going to look at some things that we can make with the plants that are in the garden. So the first thing is the catmint. So remember this with the slightly furry leaves. So I've dried a load of the catmint leaves and flowers, which you can see here. They're nice and crumbly, but quite a strong scent off them. And what you can do is, so to make a little pouch, you just need a piece of muslin, or you can use like an old kind of like sock or a bit of tights or something like that if you want as well. But the muslin's just a little bit nicer. Basically anything porous that the scent of the catmint can come out through. And then you just put maybe like a tablespoon and a half into the middle there, bring up the corners, and then you can just tie that in a little pouch. So I've just got a bit of string here, tie that through, and then you could just hang that somewhere, or if you wanted to just for the scent of it, or if you've got a child who's got respiratory things during the night, you can just place this kind of near their pillow or between the pillowcase and the pillow, and they'll be breathing in the catmint or the catnip throughout the night, and it will last, you know, you can tell whenever it's past its best because it'll stop smelling so strongly. So in that case, you just compost what's in there and put some more dried catmint in. So that's quite a nice, quite simple one. You could always also give it to children as a tea, but it's not the most palatable. It's a little bit bitter, so actually just getting it into the scent is probably the best way to do it. So that's our like really quick and easy thing to do. Slightly more complicated, and again for children's respiratory conditions, we've got the hyssop. So this is the Hyssopus officinalis with these little purple flowers just coming up. Now I'm just going to kind of give these a bit of a smoosh, which is definitely a technical term, before I put them into some water, and I'm going to heat them up to cook them a little bit and get all the flavours out of them, and then I'm going to add some sugar. So I'm just going to put some water in with this. So we're going to be making a syrup. So basically we're making a strong tea, and then because we want to keep it, so obviously if you make a tea, you stick it in the fridge, that'll last for maybe a few days. But if we preserve it with something, then that's going to make it last a lot longer. So what we're going to preserve it with is sugar. So you want about 50-50 water to sugar, which is quite a lot of sugar. So there's, I would guess, about 250 mils of water in there. So that's half of this pack of sugar that we're going to put in to preserve the hyssop syrup. So you'll be diluting that quite a lot. So I would say like a teaspoon with some boiling water, and then give that to children to drink if they've got a cough or a cold coming on. So we're just going to leave that to kind of boil away and do its thing whilst we go over to the other two plants that we're looking at. Leave that just there. So the other two plants that we're looking at are the marigold and the oregano, and both of these we're going to preserve in oil. Now the marigold, like I said, we're going to preserve that dried, and that's because all of these juicy little petals will create a lot of water in the environment, and that's going to mean that there's a really high chance that it will go mouldy. So unlike vinegar that we've done previously, oil is a little bit more tricky. You've got to keep more of an eye on it. So ideally you want to put your oil to infuse on a sunny windowsill, and that will help the properties of the plant to infuse out. And you really definitely want to decant it and take the plant material out after no more than 2 weeks. So the marigold, we're putting this all in dry, and it's very light and fluffy marigold petals, so they do tend to fly about the place, so don't worry about that too much. Pop those in. I'm going to put the rest of these in. So just taking them off. So these little orange ones I've dried quite recently, so they're still on the flower heads. So I'm just taking those off because they don't really have any medicinal benefit, and they'll just end up soaking some oil up, which isn't really what you want. But you don't have to do that. You can just put them in as they are. It's just a bit more finicky doing it this way, but it works a bit better as well. So I'm just going to put the rest of these in as is. And dropping quite a few of them. So we'll scoop up the ones that have fallen on the table. It's nice and easy. And then you slowly pour on your oil. So with the marigold, we're using sunflower oil, because we're going to use this externally as a sort of balm for the skin. It doesn't really matter if you use a kind of not too expensive oil, a sort of regular cooking oil. So I'm just trying to pour this on in a steady stream to try to make sure that the marigold gets well kind of absorbed into the... I'm just going to use this to poke one of the ones that hasn't quite gone in. There we go. So this is your marigold oil, which again, so we're going to take this and put it in a sunny spot if we get any more sun, and that will infuse out and get more of a kind of yellowy orangey colour, and then we'll strain that using a sieve with a piece of muslin in it in a couple of weeks' time to get the marigold oil, which you can mix in with things that you already have to like increase their medicinal potency, or you can also just use it as it is, or maybe put some essential oils in it, so something like lavender would be quite nice. So the hyssop's boiling away there, so I'm just going to turn that off. And just let that sit for a little bit. I don't want it to go fully cold because I need to dissolve the sugar, but I do want to just let that sit for a little while. So in the meantime, we'll do the oregano. So oregano we're going to preserve in olive oil, and that's because we're going to use it more like a salad dressing. It can also be used medicinally, but it's most commonly used in food. And there is that whole idea that food is medicine as well. So if you're making really tasty salads with some lovely oregano oil on, that's going to be good for your health as well. So I'm going to strip these. The way that I would usually do it is strip most of it this way, and then just take the flower heads off the top. And with this, we're probably going to leave the oregano in the oil for a while. So I'm purposely not putting too much oregano oil in so that it all stays beneath the oil as long as possible. Oregano itself, unlike the marigold particularly, oregano has some antiseptic properties, so it's much less likely to go mouldy even though we're doing it fresh. And in fact, I've accidentally left oregano oil for months and months and months in a cupboard, and it's been absolutely fine. But for now, you're just going to want to make this up, and you can start using it pretty much immediately whilst it's doing the infusing, because the scent of the oregano is so strong that it starts to come out in the oil really from like early on. So again, just going to pour this on slowly. And the hope is that it kind of gets a bit soggy with the oil and doesn't rise up too much. So just letting that pour. And I'm not even going to quite fill this, because you actually really don't need to, because like I said, the oregano itself is slightly antiseptic. So that's enough for us for now. So we're going to set that aside. This one doesn't need to be on a sunny windowsill in the same way that the marigold does, because we're not having to undo this after 2 weeks. So those are just going to sit aside for now. Put that lid on. Okay. So back to the hyssop. So this has cooled down a little bit. I'm just going to pull the hyssop itself out. Set that aside, and then we're going to take about half of the sugar and mix it in. I'll just check. Yeah, so the lovely smell of the hyssop in that. It's still very clear, but I'm putting in half of the sugar, so that will pretty much double the volume of the syrup. So it'll work out at being roughly 500 mils of hyssop syrup. I'm just going to give that a bit of a stir. So there should be enough residual heat in this for that sugar to dissolve. So just giving that a good stir. And if you need to, you can put it back on the heat. Put it back on the warmer hob. But this is actually dissolving absolutely fine, and you don't want to put too much heat on it because it can start to caramelize. And although that would be kind of tasty, it's not really what you're looking for. You're looking for something more like a cordial. So that's almost dissolved right now. So I'm going to, and you can actually smell the sugar kind of brings out the smell of the hyssop. So that's a really quite strong smell from just a few minutes of doing that. And that's everything pretty much dissolved. So what I'll do is I'll bottle this up in a glass bottle, obviously labelled, and that will keep for about a year. So if you make it this summer, it'll see you through the winter. For any kind of coughs and colds, especially with kids, but good for adults as well. The same with the catmint. If you know an adult who's got a snotty nose and stays up all night sneezing, then you can use that for them as well. So that's our final syrup. So it smells very strongly, but it doesn't have a lot of colour to it. But don't worry, if yours looks like that, that's what it's meant to look like. It's the smell we're after. So that's everything for this session. Thanks for coming along.